Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Don't freak out. I'm trying something new today. A little experiment on YouTube with the algorithm and engagement, and yeah, if you want the ASMR version of this video, it is up on my Patreon. And yeah, this is just like a one-time thing. I am just curious about some things, so I'm doing a little experiment. We have a crazy case today, but before we get into it, I just want to mention that this video is sponsored by the Coldest Water. This is my favorite water bottle ever. It keeps my water ice cold all day long. I recently went to Arizona and I filled this up at home and drove for like 13 hours. And when I got there, there was still ice in the bottom of my water bottle. So check out the links down below and grab yourself one. Today's case is a doozy. So let's get into it. Anthony Todt, or Tony, as he goes by, was born to Robert and Loretta Todt in Bensalem, Pennsylvania. Tony attended Montville High School in Oakland, Connecticut, and people described him as a very nice kid, very friendly kid, but people didn't really know his past or what he had gone through. He was actually described as not having a mean bone in his body. But when Tony was 4, he went through something pretty traumatic. So his father, Robert Todt, who was 28 years old when this happened, and this traumatic event happened in 1980. So his dad is 28. He's a teacher. He worked in special education and worked at a high school. At the time, the family was living in Levittown, Pennsylvania, and Robert was married to Loretta, and they had their 2 children, Tony and then his sister Chrissy. On March 19th, 1980, Loretta just wasn't feeling great, and her husband was going to night school to get his master's. So she had the kids. He was at school. She put her kids to bed, and then she went to bed pretty early and fell asleep. She woke up and there were 2 men in her home. One of the men, actually, when she woke up, was like holding her down and hitting her in the face. Now, she doesn't have a lot of specific memories about this event, but she remembers after the attack, she got out of bed and she had like a really bad headache. She would later say, quote, "I remember my head felt really weird. My head hurt. And I remember walking by my bedroom dresser and turning around and seeing blood all over the bed. I then walked into the bathroom and turned on the light and saw my face and all the blood. My eye looked just horrible." End quote. At the time, Loretta was in shock and had no idea that she had been shot in the face. The bullet had gone through her left eye and it was resting in her brain. So she goes downstairs. Again, she's in shock. She's not thinking super clearly. And she thinks she's going to get in her car. But her car is gone. So she ends up calling a friend, a neighbor. And the neighbor was the one who called police. So police show up at the house around 11:30 p.m. And this is the same time that her husband is just getting home from his night classes. Loretta was rushed to the hospital. But initially, they thought she had just been beat up and no one realized she had been shot. Loretta lost vision in that eye, and I guess there were fragments of the bullet that remained in her brain, but she did survive. So immediately, police began investigating. This is an attempted murder. They began collecting evidence in the home. Some of the things that they Included in their collection of evidence was some guns that were owned by Robert Todt, bloody pillowcases, bullet casings. There was a bottle of brandy that was found on this woodpile outside, and there was a vomit on the woodpile. Robert, of course, was interviewed by police, but he told them, I was at night school when this attack happened, and then he kind of pointed the finger at someone he thought might be involved, and that was a man named Robert Charmante. And he said that this guy had been in their home a few days before the attack. The day after Loretta was shot, her car was found in a parking lot off Route 13. Both of the doors of the car were unlocked, and the passenger door was actually slightly opened. So as part of the investigation, police interviewed 4-year-old Tony. And he told them that he woke up because he heard his mom screaming, and he walked out into the hallway, but a black man picked him up and put him back into his bed. And he told police there was also another man who he saw wrestling with his mother on her bed. So police are investigating, and within a few days, they learned some interesting things regarding this case. So they fingerprinted the brandy bottle that had been found outside and found that those fingerprints belonged to John Charmante. So let's kind of talk about him for a second. He's a 20-year-old man who police are aware of. He has a criminal record, but nothing for violent crimes. He was a known drug addict, and so police kind of had run-ins with him. And they actually found a really interesting connection between Robert and John Charmante. So John's younger brother was a student of Robert's at the time the shooting happened. Police also discovered that Robert's alibi, remember he had been in night school, or in classes that night, was complete bogus. In fact, he had a big secret he was hiding. He was dating a nurse who lived in a different town, named Colleen, and actually they were engaged to be married. So Robert's engaged to this other younger woman, and then he's spending time in one town with her, and then in the next town, he has a family. Robert, so then this comes out, and Colleen tells police, well, Robert was with me the whole night until 11 o'clock. So she does alibi him. And so police turn their attention back on John Charmante, who ended up giving police multiple different stories about what happened. The first time he spoke with them, he said he had nothing to do with this attack. Nothing. And then the next time they talked to him, he said that Robert had paid him $800 to break into the house and ransack it, to make it look like it was a home invasion while Robert was upstairs killing his wife. He said he didn't know that he was going to kill his wife. He was sitting downstairs drinking some brandy, and he heard the gunshot and freaked out and ran outside and threw up near the pile of wood. In another statement to police, he said that he had been paid by Robert to kill his wife, but that he had done it alone. Nobody had helped him. Robert wasn't there. He said he walked into her room and shot her, then kind of ransacked the house, stole her car, and left. He told police that he threw the gun into a nearby creek and left, and this gun was never found. So to prosecutors, this looked like Robert Todt had his wife killed so he could marry his new girlfriend. He was arrested, and his family, including his wife, swore that he was being set up for this. During the trial, they brought in some of his high school students who said that he had been having an inappropriate relationship with one of the girls, like an intimate relationship. It also came out during trial that John Charmante had a learning disability, so he was easily manipulated, and this was exactly what Robert Todt had done. Robert's defense attorneys tried to say that John Charmante was a drug addict and he had just broken into the house trying to get drugs or money for drugs and had tried to kill Loretta. So the prosecutors put John Tarmante on the stand. He had made a deal with them, and he said that he had been hired to try and kill Loretta. And interestingly enough, Loretta did not believe her husband was responsible. She thought he was innocent. She was quoted saying something about how she didn't think he was innocent because she loved him or because he was her husband. She did not think he was capable of this, and she knew he didn't do it. Robert Todt was convicted and went to prison. He was sentenced for 10 to 20 years. Robert always maintained that he was innocent of this crime. But in the meantime, he has these two children who have been through the most traumatic thing that a child probably possibly could. Their mother was almost nearly murdered. Now their father's in prison for her murder or attempted murder. And Tony Todt was just 4 years old when this all happened, which is heartbreaking. These are very formative years in child development. And not surprisingly, Tony was left with a lot of emotional issues. After the attack on his mother, he lost his safe feeling. He didn't feel safe. He couldn't sleep well at night. And he became very, very quiet. He was just a quiet child who kept everything inside. Luckily, both Tony and Chrissy were put in therapy and went to therapy for years. They never again had anything to do with their father as they were growing up. For a really long time, Loretta kind of stood by her husband's side. She would file for divorce quickly after he was sentenced, but she didn't believe he was responsible. She always kind of stood by him, and then a few months after he was sent to prison, she filed for divorce. It would be years and years later before she would come out and say, now that she was removed from the situation, and from the trauma of just everything that had happened, she could see more clearly, and she did believe that her husband was behind it. Loretta would go on to marry a man named Irving Schmidt, and Irving would step in as the father figure for Chrissy and Tony and raise these children. Tony and Chrissy considered him their father. So the family moved to Montville, Connecticut at this time, and they tried to leave everything in the past and have a fresh start. And Tony really began to come out of his shell and blossom into a normal kid. He played sports. He was captain of his soccer team. He did really well in school, got great grades. He was very involved in a leadership program. He was in student council. He was class president junior and senior year and voted most likely to succeed. It was at Montville High School where Tony would meet Megan, who would end up being his high school sweetheart. They dated. They were definitely a very popular couple. Obviously, when couples stay together for more than a couple months in high school, it's kind of a big deal. So everyone just thought they were perfect together. Megan Gula was an only child. Her parents were Gail and Albert. Because she was an only child, they doted on her and, of course, loved her, but gave her all of their attention. She played tennis, so she's also very involved in school, which I think they had this in common. She played tennis. She was very musical. She sang. She played piano. And so the two of them meet, and they dated all through high school, and then they head off to college, and they kept dating all through college. They both attended Sacred Heart University in Connecticut, and both Tony and Megan earned their master's degrees. And it was then that they decided to get married and start a family. So on September 26th, 2006, they had their first child, a little boy named Alec. And he was a very serious kid. He was interested in learning. He was always reading, particularly about history. And after Alec was born, about 2 years, Megan gave birth to Tyler, who was their second child. And Tyler was like this silly kid. He was always trying to make people laugh. He was a very happy, just funny, go lucky boy. Tyler was smart too, and he played the piano. So both boys played the piano and were very musically talented. On July 23rd, 2015, Megan gave birth to Zoe. She was the princess of the family, but also the boss. She was born into this family of people who sang and played musical instruments and played the piano. And I guess she used to beg her mom to sign her up for piano lessons so she could be like her older brothers. She could get them to do anything, and everyone just adored little Zoe. She was just this beautiful little blonde-haired princess. The family settled in Colchester, Connecticut, which is this super cute town in New England. Very small towny. Megan as a mother was just amazing. She loved to cook. So every time she cooked, she involved her kids and taught them how to cook. And it was like a tradition to have her children always joining her in the kitchen. She was a very maternal person. Even before she had children, she was just that warm maternal person. But once she had her own kids, she really just shined as a mother. She was one of those people who was born to be a mother. She was patient and loving, and her children were amazing, and they were very well behaved and talented, and everyone just loved their kids because they had this mother pouring so much time and attention and love into them, and they just grew into such beautiful children. Whenever it would snow, it's Connecticut, so it snowed a lot in the winter, the older boys would wake up and just go shovel everyone's sidewalks. Megan was this very calm presence. If she walked into a room, she could change the energy. She was just very zen and happy, and she wanted everyone to feel comfortable and happy around her. She decided she wanted to become a yoga instructor, and she had gotten her master's in physical therapy, but now she's into yoga, so she does that. The community of Colchester just loved the Todt family. It was a small town, like I said. Megan was very sweet. Her children were sweet. Megan met people because she taught yoga. She homeschooled her kids, but was still out in the community so much that she made a lot of friends and made an impression. Tony and Megan had actually started a physical therapy practice called Family Physical Therapy. Megan had worked there for a while, but wanted to stay home with the children, so she did. And by 2012, they had actually opened a second location because the physical therapy practice was booming. Tony was this amazing father. He loved his children. He was always bragging about them, and he coached Little League, he coached soccer. He was this wonderful, patient, encouraging husband to Megan. And when she decided she wanted to be a yoga teacher, he was supportive of that. When she wanted to homeschool the children, he was supportive of that. And he helped her around the house. He wasn't one of those dads who was so busy working, running two businesses, that he wouldn't come home and cook or help her with the kids. And as a physical therapist, he was also amazing. His patients loved him. He had a great bedside manner. Things were just great for this family. They loved Colchester where they lived. So it was a little strange when they decided to move. They kind of just sold their house and up and moved to Celebration, Florida. And all of their family had lived in Colchester. They were both from that area. So when they moved, it was weird. They actually bought a condo in Celebration, Florida. which is right next to Disney World. And I guess Celebration was kind of designed by Disney, kind of like a manufactured neighborhood almost, to give you the feel of the Disney magic. The town was built as an experiment and then Disney sold it, but it looked like it was almost out of a movie. The little town was made up of neighborhoods that were built around parks. People hung out in the parks. People were friendly. People hung out on their porches that wrapped around their houses. And in the summer, they had like little speakers hidden in the trees that they would like pipe bird songs through, so it sounded like birds were singing. In the winter, they brought in fake snow. So it is a real town where real people live, but it was also like almost like the Truman Show, like kind of manufactured to give people this nostalgic, happy 1950s vibe. And we'll probably never know exactly what prompted the family to move. Tony said that Megan had been bitten by a tick and was like had all these health issues and then was finally diagnosed with Lyme disease. She was very ill. So according to Tony, she wanted to move to Florida because it was better weather and she felt like the sunshine would help her. And so they up and moved the family. But they couldn't just up and move their family business. The physical therapy offices were located in Colchester. So Tony would work in Connecticut during the week, and then he would go to Florida. So I think he would go like Tuesday through Friday. He would be in Connecticut, and then he would fly home for the weekends. When he was in Connecticut, they had sold their house there, so he stayed at his mom's sometimes or at hotels, or I guess sometimes he just slept in his offices. In May of 2019, the Todt family moved out of their little condo because it was cramped. They had 4 kids and they also had a dog named Breezy. So it was like a tightly packed unit. They moved right around the corner into a rental home that was also in Celebration, Florida. The house had 5 bedrooms. It had a pool. It was just a beautiful home. But they decided to keep their condo in case they had friends and family. A majority of their friends and family lived in Connecticut, so they thought they would keep the condo so if anyone ever wanted to come visit, they had a place to stay. Megan and the children are living full-time in Celebration, Florida, and Tony is commuting back and forth. And in the summer of 2019, people noticed Tony was acting weird. He seemed to be stressed out. He gained a lot of weight, like his eyes, he had dark circles under his eyes, and it became apparent that something was weighing on Tony, but most people believed it was just like the commuting back and forth was a lot. He just continued to kind of spiral. He was frazzled, he was disorganized, he would snap at people. And on November 21st, 2019, federal agents showed up at Tony's house or at Tony's business. So we're in Connecticut. And it would turn out that he had been under investigation, or his businesses had, with the FBI for unethical and illegal business practices, stemming from an investigation that started the previous year. So no one around Tony knew this, but his finances were a disaster. He was in massive debt. He was taking out private loans, trying to cover up the debt, which isn't illegal. But what is illegal was he was billing Medicaid and Medicare fraudulently. And then he would get that money and then try to pay off all of these loans. He would bill his patients' insurance for appointments they hadn't had, for procedures they had not undergone. And some of these people saw him like once or twice, and then he continued billing them for like a whole year, like every month or several times a month. And these people were not even coming in for treatments. So federal agents would end up finding hundreds of fraudulent appointments and procedures that Tony had been processing. And tens of thousands of dollars were made in this like fraudulent scam or fraudulent way of billing. Remember, they had bought their condo in Florida, plus they're renting a home, so they're paying a mortgage and they're paying rent. Plus they have rent on their 2 businesses and they have to pay their employees. And they're just living well outside their means. And this is when their house of cards, or Tony's house of cards, came tumbling down pretty quickly. Families had seen Tony just a few times, and then they noticed that they kept getting billed. And these were obviously fraudulent claims because one of the families had moved away. So they turned him in or notified the authorities that they had been billed 55 times in 7 months, and none of these appointments were actually legit. Then Tony's employees began having their paychecks bounce. One of the offices, so he has 2 locations still, one of the locations was beginning the eviction process because Tony hadn't paid rent, and 2 investment firms on top of all this were suing Tony. So the FBI shows up in Tony's office to inform him that he is under investigation. And they want to formally interview him. He just flat out says he's done nothing wrong. But it didn't take long for agents to kind of break him down. And so then he kind of starts admitting to everything. He tells them he is solely the one responsible. He's the one in charge. No one else knew anything like what he was up to. And he's like, yeah, I've been really living above my means for years and years and years, and it's catching up with me, and I started to steal from Peter to pay Paul. He told them that he was getting ready to go to Florida because it was Thanksgiving weekend, and when he came back to Connecticut on December 8th, around December 8th, he would bring his lawyer and tell them everything. He was fully willing to cooperate, but he needed to go to Florida and be the one to tell Megan what was going on. He couldn't let her find out through the news or rumors or anything like that. He needed to be the one to tell his wife. And then he would come back and surrender himself. I don't know if they would have arrested him right away. I don't know. But he makes this deal with them. He's being very cooperative. And so the agents leave. And all of his employees are freaking out. And he's like, don't worry. There's just a little misunderstanding. Totally not a big deal. I'm going to clear everything up. Now, because Megan and Tony were from Connecticut, they were raised there, all their families there, all their friends are there. They always went there for the holidays. They would go up for Thanksgiving. They would go up for Christmas to be closer with family and also to have a holiday vibe. Florida is warmer, there's no snow, there's no ice skating, but New England feels much more authentically the holidays, if that makes sense. There's real snow, there's real ice skating, there's sleigh riding and hot cocoa, and they liked to have this almost hallmarky Christmas experience with their family. So they always went up there for the holidays, and in 2019, Megan called her aunt, and she's very close to her aunt. At this point, Megan's father has passed away, and Megan is estranged from her mother. So she's very close with her aunt, though. She calls her aunt in Connecticut and tells her that they've decided to take their kids on a trip for the holidays. Actually, she texted her aunt. She didn't call her on the phone. She texted her. She's like, hey, we're not going to make it up there for Thanksgiving this year. We're going to take our kids on a trip. And this was out of character for Megan, but they thought it was a lovely idea for her to take her family on vacation and kind of switch things up. So they don't hear from her and they don't see her around Thanksgiving. And as Christmas began to get closer, her aunt calls her again. She doesn't answer, but she texts and says that her and her kids have come down with an awful flu and they probably weren't going to make it to Christmas. But she promised them as soon as they got better, they would come up to Connecticut and visit. So Cindy became very concerned when she doesn't hear from Megan. Megan's kind of gone radio silent because she realizes she hasn't actually spoken with Megan for over a month. She's texted her a few times, but usually they would talk, like have these really long phone conversations. So Cindy, her aunt, is very concerned at Megan's lack of calls. And she kind of tries to remember that Megan's an adult. But then she gets a text from Tony. And he says, our family has decided to kind of go off the grid, turn our phones off, and just be more present. So she's kind of alarmed. Then all communication just stops. On December 29th, 2019, this call came in to Osceola County Sheriff's Office, and it's Tony's sister, Chrissy. And she tells law enforcement that the family has had the flu and she hasn't heard from them for a couple weeks, and they were really sick during Christmas, but she's like, the only person we've been able to talk to is my brother, and now we can't get a hold of him. And so sheriff's deputies go for like a welfare check. They go to their home in Celebration, and no one is home. But there's nothing suspicious, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest foul play. So then they call back Chrissy and say, hey, no one's home. And she's like, well, can you go check their condo? It's just right around the corner. And, they have the second condo. Can you go check for them there? And so they go to the condo and they're checking for the family at the condo. Again, they're outside. There's nothing suspicious. No one's answering the door. So they leave because they determine that there's no one in the condo. Nothing looked or seemed suspicious. And then 8 days go by. And Tony texts his sister, Chrissy. So she's feeling a little bit better at this point. But then that feeling goes away quickly. So Tony leaves his phone at a Starbucks and somebody finds it and texts her. So now she knows she can't get a hold of him at all. He's been acting weird. Something weird is going on. And now she has no way of getting a hold of him. And then one of the neighbors who lived next to the house that they were renting in Celebration calls and says, hey, an eviction notice was just like posted or put on Tony and Megan's home in Celebration. She said, we haven't seen the family in a long time, but there's an eviction notice on their front door. So on January 6th, police get this call from federal agents who were looking for Tony because Tony never returned to Connecticut with his lawyer to turn himself in like he said he would. And so now they're trying to track him down because he's kind of just gone. And he promised to answer their questions with his lawyer. So federal agents are now looking for Tony Todt. They're not heavily looking. I don't know that they think he's on the run at this point, but they're just calling family members. They're calling employees, trying to track him down. And soon, because of all these calls from federal agents, everyone kind of becomes aware that Tony's business is under investigation by the feds. And Tony's sister begins freaking out again. Like, she knew something was going on. She didn't know what it was. She calls the sheriff's office again. And this phone call, she's a little more frantic. She's like, quote, I just found out there's actually an active FBI investigation happening up here in Connecticut. And in conversations with my sister-in-law was making comments. We're just kind of putting it all together about basically the world ending on the 28th, and nobody has talked to them. Nobody has physically spoken to my sister-in-law since the 26th of December, and my brother has stopped texting as of Monday. So I don't know if there's any way that someone can go out. They're renting a place. They're actually being evicted from this property. The last place that we know they were supposedly at is this property. But they also have a condo right around the corner as well, end quote. So she's kind of rambling. And at this point, just weird stuff is coming out. Now Chrissy's saying that Tony and Megan were talking about the world ending. She talked about that in the 911 call. No one else really knows if Megan and Tony were making statements about an apocalypse or not, but this was mentioned in the call. So once again, deputies head back to the house for another farewell check. And on January 10th, the house seemed empty. No one answered the door. The blinds were closed, they couldn't see in. It really seemed like no one was home. They would return again on January 10th, and again, no one was home. They were not alarmed because the family was known to travel a lot. They were living a pretty fancy, I don't know, not exotic, but they traveled a lot. They had homes everywhere. And so what police were thinking was, look, the family's known to travel a lot. There's this eviction notice on their door, and they would have tried to remove it if they were home. So they must still be out for the holidays. Nobody has been home since we've been there. Nothing looks like it's been touched or changed. And when they get home from the holidays, I'm sure they will contact people. On January 12th, the landlord of the house calls the police because she had heard chatter on Facebook about the Todt family being missing. She's in the process of trying to collect money from them. So she calls police and she's like, look, I'm the landlord. I am really concerned about the family. Something weird is going on. I haven't been able to get a hold of them. Up to this point, they had been great tenants, but rent hadn't been paid in months. And so she calls police and she's like, look, I feel like something weird is going, I'm actually concerned about this family. The next day, on January 13th, federal agents from Connecticut, who have no idea what's happening down in Florida, go to Florida to arrest Tony Todt on fraud charges. And they have no idea that the family's missing, that they kept getting welfare check requests. So these agents show up at the Todt house and they're sitting outside with a warrant, thinking they'll find him, they'll arrest him, they'll be done. At 7:45 a.m., the agents are out there and one of them sees Tony and he comes outside, he sits down on the porch, and he makes eye contact with this agent who feels like their cover had been blown. And so that agent kind of switches their location and asks another one to go in front of the house. So another one is in a car and drives by, kind of parks in front of the house. And this one again, sees Tony. So two people have now positively identified Tony Todt. And so they're like, okay, this is what we need. They're watching him. They're kind of waiting to see what he does. He sits on the porch. He's acting kind of weird. He's a little shaky, I guess. And then he gets up and goes in the house. So they decide to call in backup. They need to arrest Tony. They have no idea what he's doing. They have no idea what the situation is in the house. They know he has a family and they want to make sure that they can arrest Tony Todt safely, get him into custody without anyone in his family being harmed or anything like that. So they call in the local sheriff's office for backup. So two sheriff's deputies show up and the five of them approach the house together to make the arrest. They knock on the door. They kind of announce themselves. They say they have a warrant. No one answers the door. They've been surveilling the home, so they know Tony's inside. There's no way he's not in that house. So they enter the house. Officers were immediately hit with the smell of human decomposition, the minute the door opened. And they're standing at the bottom of the staircase and they hear a sound, kind of like a mumbling sound coming from upstairs. The house was pretty dark. All of the blinds were drawn, but through the darkness of the home, police see this large figure slowly making its way down the stairs. And this figure would be Tony Todt. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, agents asked him where his wife was, and he replied she was sleeping upstairs. And then he turned around and yelled up the stairs for Megan. And then he's like, yeah, and I have no idea where my kids are. So they kind of just stand there thinking Megan's going to come down the stairs or wake up or whatever, but she never did. So then agents made their way up to the second story of the home. They go inside in the master bedroom, and this would be a scene that they would never forget. Like, it was burned into their minds. First, they see Megan's feet sticking out from under some blankets on the bed. They were visibly discolored, and it was obvious that she was in a pretty advanced state of decomposition. On the mattress on the floor were the bodies of 11-year-old Tyler and 13-year-old Alec. Both were wrapped in blankets. Their hands were holding matching crucifixes. And Breezy, the Todt family dog, was also lying dead in the bedroom on the floor. Initially, police could not find 4-year-old Zoe. They asked Tony where Zoe was. They kept saying, "Where is your daughter? Where is Zoe?" They're looking through the entire house. They're thinking maybe she was hiding somewhere. Like, if there was this attack on her family and she's so little, Tony's like, "No, she's just in her bedroom asleep," but she wasn't in her bedroom. And so they ended up searching through drawers and cupboards and under beds, like thinking, where could a little girl hide if something crazy was happening in her house? But they finally found her at the foot of her mother's bed. Zoe was also wrapped in blankets, but she was so tiny and her body was so badly decomposed, there was really nothing left of her. So nobody had noticed her when they had originally done the search. Because she was younger and smaller, her body decomposed much more quickly than that of her mother and her brothers. So they didn't even notice her little body. It was believed that the family had been dead for weeks, and Tony Todt had just been living in the home with his family's bodies while they decomposed. Tony was super out of it. He couldn't really carry on a conversation. He couldn't answer questions. And he told police he had taken a lethal dose of Benadryl. So they rushed him to the hospital to be treated for like a failed attempt to end his life. And after he was treated, Tony Todt confessed to killing his entire family. Now, while he was in the hospital and he was being examined by physicians, they noticed Tony had several marks on his body. He had marks on his hands and these weird circular, almost hole marks on his body. And it's believed that he got these from his family members fighting back. He told detectives that he and Megan had been planning this for months, that they were going to kill their children and kill each other because they all wanted to die together. So he said he stabbed his children with a knife and suffocated them. And once the children were dead, Megan used the knife to stab herself in the stomach. And a few hours later, he killed her. Anthony suffocated her and waited for their bodies to come out of rigor mortis so he could move them into the bedroom so they would all be together. And he also killed the family dog, Breezy. And then it was his turn. Like, it was the apocalypse. They were planning this according to him. And it was his turn to die. But he chickened out and couldn't go through with it. He couldn't really remember when he killed his family, but he said it was before Christmas. So this is a horrific scene. All of the remains were taken to the medical examiner's office so that autopsies could be performed. It was found that Megan, Tyler, Alec, and Breezy had all been stabbed. Zoe did not have any signs of being stabbed, but because she was so badly decomposed, it was just hard to tell for sure. All 4 had died from homicidal violence and antihistamine toxicity. And the medical examiner determined the entire family had been dead for at least 2 weeks. Crime scene investigators found hunting knives inside the home, one of which was covered with blood. And they also found first aid spray on the nightstand in the master bedroom. This spray had bloody fingerprints on it. Like, after Tony had killed his family, he had put some spray on his wounds that he got in the process of killing his family. They found black zip ties. They found red nylon restraint straps that were still fastened to the bed. So Tony's in jail, and he makes a call to his sister Christy in February. And he tells her he doesn't remember anything. He said he's in the solitary cell right now. He can't remember anything before or after Christmas. And he said the only thing that he remembers is being at the hospital and waking up in jail. And then there was like an officer. And he said, quote, "I have no idea of anything," end quote. However, at the hospital, he had already given a full confession. He went on to tell his sister that he remembered before Christmas, Megan had wanted him to go to their condo and get this Mickey Mouse necklace of Zoe's that she loved. And she told him the necklace was in this box in the master bedroom. And he told Chrissy that that was the last thing they needed. Now remember, when all of the bodies were discovered, they all had something. The boys had crucifixes. Megan was wearing Tony's wedding ring. But Zoe didn't have anything. So people suspect that this was the last thing we needed, was like the one thing for Zoe. The Mickey Mouse necklace was supposed to be with Zoe when she died. But he tells his sister kind of cryptically that was the last thing they needed. But he went to the condo and he couldn't find the key. So then he went home. He got a crowbar and he tried to break into the condo. He breaks in. And then he tells his sister, "I still couldn't find anything, and I ended up falling asleep. And well, let's just leave it at that," end quote. And then he starts crying, and he asks his sister to go to the condo and find the necklace. So then in March, while he's still behind bars, Tony calls his sister again and said, and she's like, "I'm cleaning up your mess in Florida." She's like, "I found the necklace." I don't know if she was literally cleaning out their homes or what the mess was, but she's like, "I found the necklace in the jewelry box in the master bedroom, exactly where Megan said it would be." And he said it wasn't there. During this phone call, he starts going off about Megan to Chrissy and says, "My wife was so controlling and she knew we were in a financial mess, but she wouldn't let him tell anyone. She wouldn't let him try to get help. And he was just carrying all of these heavy burdens." And he said the real reason they had moved to Florida was so that Megan could try and keep the finances a secret from the rest of the family, because the walls were starting to close in. She was kind of behind everything. And so that was why they had moved. She didn't want the secrets to come out. And he claimed he had nothing to do with the decision. She just decided to move the family. He also said that one day he and Zoe had been watching a movie and he passed out. Now remember, he gained a lot of weight. He was having a lot of health problems. And he said when Megan came home, I came to, and I was like, "Megan, I've got to go to the hospital." And she refused to let him go to the hospital. And he said Megan was always there, telling him what to do, bossing him around, refusing to let him seek medical help, even though he was obviously unhealthy and struggling with some things. This is a weird thing for him to lie about, because he didn't even live with Megan for most of the week. So he surely could have gone and saw a doctor while he was in Connecticut for like 5 days every week. Because Megan and the kids solely stayed in Florida after they moved. It wasn't like she was going back and forth with him. Then during this call, he also says that Megan killed the children and then she killed herself. Over the course of the investigation, what came out was that in 2010, Robert Todt, Tony's father, who is out of prison at this point, contacted him through like Facebook or something and wanted to talk to him. And they began kind of communicating back and forth and spoke on the phone. And Robert ended up meeting Tony and Chrissy for the first time as adults. He got to meet his grandchildren. And then shortly after that, Robert Todt's sister died, and Tony and Chrissy both attended the funeral. But it was really awkward and weird to be with that side of the family. They had nothing to do with them since their father had been in prison. So Tony had nothing to do with his father since he was 4 and barely remembered him. But for whatever reason, they decided to go to their aunt's funeral. It was super uncomfortable. And after that, they kind of backed off and didn't want anything to do with their real father. So they kind of have nothing to do with him until Chrissy can't find Tony. She's calling the police. The police are saying they're not at home. All of these welfare checks are happening. So she decides to reach out to her father and see if maybe he happened to know where Tony was. She was desperate. He didn't know and didn't find out about what had happened to Tony's family or his grandchildren until about a week later. But while Tony was in jail awaiting his trial, father and son became very close. They bonded over who knows what. I could guess. Tony had officially been charged at this point with 4 counts of premeditated first-degree murder, and these charges would end up being reduced to second-degree murder. Tony pled not guilty. And Tony and his father, Robert, just became super weirdly close while he was in jail. There's a letter. You can find it online. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Tony writes his father this letter. It was dated June 19th, 2020. And in this letter, he claimed that his wife gave the children a pie laced with drugs and then stabbed them and suffocated them. And that he is 10,000% innocent of all of the preposterous charges against him. Tony said that on the day of the murders, he wasn't even home. He was at the family condo looking for his daughter's Mickey Mouse necklace. He said Megan killed the children and then killed herself in front of him. So he returned home and Megan stabbed herself and he had to watch her die. And then he said he did CPR to try to save her. He spoke in the letter of the necklace. And he was quoted saying, "It was the one thing we needed for that weekend for reasons that you'll find out later," end quote. So he's being very cryptic with his father, kind of like he had been with his sister in previous phone calls. But he says in the letter he fell asleep and, quote, "I didn't wake up till the next morning, and because of that, it changed everything." He said he was so tired he had fallen asleep in the family minivan outside of the condo. And when he returned, Megan had made this pie. He said it looked delicious, but it tasted awful. And he's like, long story short, she'd given them a Benadryl/Tylenol PM pie, separated them, woke them up at 11 o'clock, stabbed them, and suffocated each one. At the news of this, so his wife is telling him what she had done, Tony says he ran to the bathroom and puked. Then he says Megan tried to pray with him. She wanted to meditate with him, but he didn't want to. He went into the bedroom with a warm washcloth and he wiped off his family's faces, like his children's faces. And he cried and he tried to make the children look more comfortable. At this point, Megan asked Tony if he was okay and he replied, "No, you murdered my children." To which she said, quote, "I released their souls," end quote. Then Megan tried to explain to him the logic of what she had done. When she went in the other room by herself, he said he heard awful noises and screams, and he went in there and she had stabbed herself. So he was like wanting to call police, wanting to call for help, but she begged him to stay with her and not leave her alone. And Tony talked about how there was blood everywhere. He said he told her that he wanted to go get help. He said he would take complete responsibility for everything that had happened to the family, but he needed to go get her some help. So he's basically begging her. She has just stabbed herself in the liver, and she will not let him. I do not think she could have physically stopped him, but he said she refused, and he didn't dare leave her alone. He tried to go to a neighbor's house, but the neighbor was out snowboarding. And when he returned, Megan was pounding Benadryl. According to this letter, Megan said, quote, "I have to go be with my babies," end quote. And she asked him over and over to kill her, but he said he couldn't do it. Like, he could not bring himself to do this. But when she died, he did do CPR until he was too exhausted to do it anymore. In different parts of this letter, he described how much he loved Megan and what real, true, loving relationship he had with his children. He talked about how painful it had been for him to move to Florida and then commute back and forth, and how hard Megan's Lyme disease illness had been on the entire family, but how he would have done anything to make Megan happy. He said Megan had not been herself since her illness began. So, like I said, you can find this entire letter online. I will post it over on Patreon. There's like a Patreon version of this video as well. But it's very cryptic, and in it he says multiple times, like, you'll see why, or this will come out soon. Also, the entire letter is kind of a humble brag. Like, he talks about what a great husband he is, how he commuted back and forth to provide for his family, and he did all the cooking, and he had to take care of Megan, and on and on and on about all the things he did for his family while he was both in Florida and in Connecticut. A phone call that Tony made to a relative, which in this newspaper article, it said it was a relative, but that it was his sister Chrissy's phone number. So I'm kind of guessing that this was a call to Chrissy. But in this call, Tony said that he didn't remember anything that had happened between Christmas and the first week in January. He said he didn't even remember going to jail. He had just been sleeping since this all happened. Tony really tried to place all of the blame on his wife, Megan. She was sick. They had to move because she was sick. She couldn't take care of the kids because she was sick. She couldn't cook because she was sick. However, he said she took care of all the finances, and he had no idea about these fraudulent charges being billed because apparently Megan was well enough to do that. He said he was totally innocent and she was behind all of the fraud charges. He is so much like Chris Watts. Actually, the person who requested that I cover this video said, hey, you should check out the Todt family case. Very similar to the Watts family case. And it really is. So Tony's trial began, and he took the stand to tell jurors that his wife had killed his children and then herself. He said Megan's depression had led her to commit the murders. He said in court, quote, I came home and my kids were dead. It was the most horrible day of my life. What made it even worse was that my wife died right in front of me, end quote. However, the day before Tony took the stand and testified that he came home and his wife was dead and his family was dead, the jurors had been played a recorded video confession in which Tony admitted to killing his entire family. So police had this taped confession, and in the video, he told detectives that he and Megan had kind of a pact to kill the entire family out of love to obtain purported salvation. He went on to say that he and his wife had talked to their children about dying and that their children wanted to die. They all wanted to die together. He said that he had suffocated Zoe because, quote, I needed to save her soul. I wanted her to be with us, end quote. Then he stabbed his two sons, suffocated Megan after she stabbed herself. So then they play that. Then the day after the recording was played for the jurors, Tony tells a much different story. He said that after Megan became sick, she became obsessed with the afterlife. Then she had this miscarriage, and she really fell deeper and deeper into a depression. He said that night he came home and found all three of his children dead. And he said in court, quote, I wasn't there when my children died. I feel like a failure. I decided I wanted to be with my family. I wanted to die, end quote. But then he claimed that he tried several times unsuccessfully to end his own life. When asked in court all about the contradictions between his testimony that day and then his confession months earlier, he responded that he was likely trying to take the blame for his wife's actions and assume blame on himself. When asked directly, "Did you kill your family?" he responded, "No." On April 14th, 2022, after hours of deliberation, jurors found Tony Todt guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty. Tony Todt was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And this is pretty recent. Like, he was sentenced last month. So that is the Todt family story. I just quickly want to cite my sources for this video. Reporting by Sten Spinella for The Day, an article titled "Todt Claims Innocence in Jail Letter," says wife killed children and family dog, then stabbed herself. Wesh Channel 2 News had an article that was titled "Celebration Man Found Guilty of First-Degree Murder and Family Slayings, Sentenced to Life in Prison." People.com had an article by Casey Baker titled "Anthony Todt Convicted of Killing Wife, 3 Children, and Family Dog in Celebration, Florida," which was published April 15th, 2022. The Orlando Sentinel had an article from April 12th, 2022 titled "Jury Seeks Anthony Todt Confessing in Family Killings. I Needed to Save Her Soul" by Montevive Cordero. The Daily Beast also had a very in-depth article about this from April 14th, 2022. And this one was titled "Jury Rejects Florida Dad's Insane Story of Family's Apocalypse Suicide Pact" by Pilar Mendez. Fox 35 Orlando had an article titled "Anthony Todt Murder Trial. Todt Claims His Wife Killed Children, Not Him." This was published April 13th, 2022. CBS News had an article titled "Man Who Allegedly Said Family Had to Die Before Apocalypse Found Guilty of Killing Wife, 3 Children, and Pet Dog in Florida." There was an episode of Looking for the Todt Family I listened to. Actually, I listened to several episodes, but I got a ton of information about the Tony Todt letter from episode 8, part 1, which was titled "The Letter." Oxygen.com had an article titled "Alleged Family Killer Anthony Todt Said He Made Death Pact with Wife Because of Apocalypse," because the apocalypse was coming, by Gina Trone. And also, there were 2 episodes of the Morbid podcast that I listened to as I was preparing for this. So that was a lot to unload. Thank you guys so much for joining me in my first ever non-ASMR video. Like I said, this is kind of just an experiment. I was talking to Geekwares ASMR, who's one of my great friends, Shannon, and talking about the ins and outs of having an ASMR channel and having a YouTube channel, and some of the awesome things, some of the harder things. And I was telling her how I'm so tired. I haven't filmed for weeks because I have to stay up till like 2 or 3 a.m. to get quiet enough in my house and in my neighborhood to do the ASMR style. And so don't freak out yet. Please don't leave me a million comments about how you hated this. If you do want to see the ASMR version of this, it's over on Patreon. And yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you for your support. I love you all, and I'll see you soon.